Ladies and gentlemen, beloved souls on a journey to healing and discernment, today we uncover the hidden cries behind the mask of pride. The narcissist may walk with an inflated stride, speak with manufactured confidence, and act like they sit on a throne of superiority. But what lies beneath is often a soul in turmoil. Many of you have encountered the harsh sting of narcissistic behavior, and perhaps you've asked, how can someone be so cold, so manipulative, so unfeeling? But here's a truth that must be told. Not all suffering wears the face of sadness. Sometimes it disguises itself in control, cruelty, and chaos. We are not here to excuse destructive behavior, but to understand it. Because once you understand the suffering, you stop internalizing the attacks. You stop blaming yourself. You rise in wisdom, and with wisdom comes power. Let us explore 7 signs that a narcissist is deeply suffering inside, not to pity, but to protect your peace, guard your purpose, and walk in truth. The narcissist's arrogance often commands the room. They walk in and expect to be seen. They interrupt conversations not because they have wisdom to share, but because silence feels like death to their ego. They dominate not to contribute, but to survive. And this is where most people get it wrong. What appears as confidence is not confidence at all. It is a shield, a cover-up, a desperate attempt to hide the truth of who they really believe they are. Their arrogance is not strength. It is the loud cry of someone who feels unworthy, invisible, and empty on the inside. You see, deep insecurity doesn't always show up as timidity. Sometimes it looks like pride, overcompensation, and exaggeration. The narcissist projects an image that says, I am enough, because inwardly they are tormented by the feeling, I will never be enough. This is why the narcissist brags so much. It's not about sharing good news. It's about convincing themselves they matter. They speak of their accomplishments, their talents, their appearance, or their influence. Not to uplift others, but to convince their own fragile inner world that they are worthy of admiration. Their self-worth is not rooted in truth or identity. It is rooted in comparison. And comparison always breeds insecurity. So even when they are praised, it's never enough. Even when they win, they still feel like losers. That's why they keep needing more validation, more followers, more titles, more admiration. Not because they are ambitious in the healthy sense, but because they are afraid that without applause, they will collapse emotionally. A truly secure person doesn't need to be seen all the time. A secure person can sit in the back and still feel whole. A secure person doesn't need to be praised in every room because their identity is not attached to external voices. But a narcissist, their whole self-image is a house of mirrors. If one mirror cracks, they break down. So they avoid introspection. They avoid silence. They avoid any situation where they might be confronted by the real, raw truth of who they are without their performance. That's why they always need an audience. It's not for celebration, it's for survival. Arrogance becomes their addiction. It becomes their drug. And just like any addiction, the dose needs to increase. At first, it's enough for them to feel superior in private. But eventually, they need people to feed that image publicly. They begin to devalue others to elevate themselves. They start to exaggerate stories. They fabricate accomplishments. They steal credit, not because they're evil, but because they are desperate. That desperation becomes dangerous because it drives them to manipulate, deceive, and exploit, all in the name of self-preservation. They do not want to be weak. They do not want to feel vulnerable. So they choose to appear powerful at all costs, even if it means destroying others emotionally. But here's the tragic part. The more arrogant they become, the further they drift from real connection. Their false image becomes a barrier. No one really knows them because they don't even know themselves. They have spent so long pretending to be someone they're not, that even in their private thoughts, they don't allow truth to enter. And when you live disconnected from truth, you cannot heal. That's why the narcissist keeps bleeding on people who didn't cut them. They are living in a constant state of emotional dissonance, pretending they are fine while their inner world is in chaos. Arrogance is the performance, but suffering is the reality. Even their relationships become tools to maintain this image. They don't seek partners, they seek mirrors. people who will reflect back their fantasy. And the moment you stop feeding their ego, the moment you confront their behavior or fail to praise them, they lash out. Not because you hurt them, but because you threaten the illusion they've built their identity upon. And when you threaten the illusion, you awaken their deepest fear, that they are not lovable, not valuable, not enough. The narcissist's arrogance, then, is not a sign of power. It is the signal flare of pain. It is the echo of childhood wounds that were never healed. Maybe they grew up feeling neglected, unseen, or constantly criticized. Maybe they were only praised when they performed. Maybe they were taught that worth was conditional and love was earned through perfection. And now as adults, they have carried that programming into every room they enter. Arrogance is their way of saying, please don't look too closely. You might not like what you see. It is their armor against rejection, their shield against shame. But no matter how high they lift themselves, if it's built on insecurity, the fall is inevitable. The truth is, arrogance can fool others for a while, but it cannot fool God, and it cannot fool the soul. Deep down, the narcissist knows something is missing, and that knowledge is their silent suffering. You may never see them cry. You may never hear them confess. But in the silence of their own mind, when the lights go out and the applause fades, they are tormented by the gap between who they pretend to be and who they really are. That gap is the pain they carry every day. That is why arrogance in the narcissist is not pride. It is hidden agony. They are addicted to attention because silence terrifies them. This is not just a preference for being noticed. It is a desperate need, rooted in an emotional hunger that never seems to be satisfied. For the narcissist, attention is not luxury, it is oxygen. When the spotlight fades, even momentarily, their internal world begins to unravel. You see, their identity is not formed from within. It is not grounded in purpose, character, or conviction. It is stitched together by the reactions and reflections of others. So when attention is withdrawn, they experience it as a kind of psychological death. Silence is not just the absence of noise, it's the absence of validation. And that is unbearable to someone who has built their entire existence on the fragile scaffolding of external approval. In silence, they are left alone with their true selves, and that self is often a wounded child trapped in a broken adult's body. Without applause, likes, or admiration, they are forced to confront the emptiness they've spent years trying to hide, even from themselves. This is why they create drama. This is why they provoke. This is why they exaggerate their accomplishments and rewrite history. It's not because they're inherently powerful. It's because they're internally panicking. The chaos they create outside is often a mirror of the chaos they are feeling inside. When they sense that people are no longer paying attention, they begin to spiral. Their words become sharper, their behaviors more erratic, and their need to dominate conversations more intense. This is not the behavior of someone who feels secure. This is the frantic grasping of someone who feels like they're disappearing. They don't just want attention, they believe they need it to survive. So when someone strong steps back, when someone wise no longer plays into their need for validation, when someone healed refuses to react, the narcissist begins to feel the weight of their internal silence. And it scares them because they realize in those moments that the performance is losing its audience. And without an audience, the character they've spent years perfecting starts to collapse. This addiction to attention can lead to self-destructive cycles. They'll chase validation even at the cost of integrity. They'll compromise values just to feel seen. They will surround themselves with enablers, flatterers, and people who will reflect back to them the image they want to believe about themselves. But even then, they're never satisfied. Because real peace doesn't come from people clapping for you. It comes from knowing who you are when no one is watching. The tragedy is that many narcissists have never been taught how to find that peace within. Perhaps they were raised in environments where love had to be earned, where being special was the only way to feel safe, or where their own pain was ignored unless it performed. So now they perform for love, they perform for praise, and they panic when the performance no longer works. You'll notice this addiction especially when you go quiet. When you stop feeding their ego, when you remove yourself from the game, suddenly they flood your phone. They post cryptic things online. They try to provoke you with jealousy. They may even become unusually generous or apologetic. But none of it is real transformation. It is survival mode. They are scrambling to bring you back into the role they need you to play. Not because they love you deeply, but because they fear being alone with their reflection. There's a lesson in this for you too. Never confuse someone's pursuit of you with genuine affection. Sometimes people chase you because they fear the silence you represent. Your peace becomes a mirror to their torment. Your distance becomes a threat to their illusion of control. And your refusal to react becomes the proof that you have risen above the cycle. So do not return to feed their addiction. Do not become a source of emotional supply for someone who refuses to find healing. Instead, guard your spirit. Protect your mind. Walk in wisdom. Because when you understand that attention for them is not just a desire, but a deep psychological dependency, you stop taking their manipulation personally. You stop blaming yourself for their breakdowns. You start seeing clearly. The narcissist's addiction to attention is not strength, it is a symptom. A symptom of inner wounds that have never been addressed, of fears that have never been faced, and of a soul that has never truly rested. And once you understand that, you will stop trying to fix them and start focusing on freeing yourself. They struggle with a fragmented sense of identity. This is perhaps one of the most tragic aspects of the narcissist's inner world, because on the outside, they seem to have it all figured out. They talk as if they know who they are. They present themselves with strong opinions, defined tastes, and unwavering certainty. But if you look deeper, if you pause and observe carefully, you'll begin to notice the inconsistencies, the contradictions, and the performance. What you're witnessing is not a solid self, but a shattered mirror held together by ego, shame, and illusion. The narcissist's identity is not rooted in truth. It's rooted in image. And because that image constantly shifts depending on who they're with, how people respond to them, and what attention they can gain, they live in a constant state of psychological instability. They don't have a steady internal compass to guide them, so they build a false self that's designed to please, impress, or dominate others. This false self becomes their survival mechanism, but it comes at a great cost. They never develop an authentic, unified sense of who they really are. You'll notice it in their contradictions. One moment they're charming, the next they're cruel. One day they admire someone, the next day they tear them down. They reinvent their story depending on who's listening. Why? Because they don't know who they are apart from who they pretend to be. They've never been grounded in self-reflection, healing, or humility. Their identity is built like a house of mirrors, one reflection after another, distorted, confused, and fragile. And this fragmentation causes tremendous internal suffering. The narcissist is constantly trying to hold together an identity that feels like it's falling apart. They adopt traits, values, and beliefs, not because they've deeply thought them through, but because those traits serve a momentary purpose, whether it's gaining admiration or avoiding abandonment. Deep down, they feel hollow, and in that hollowness, they become desperate for reinforcement from the outside world to make them feel like they exist, like they matter, like they are somebody. They look to others not as companions, but as mirrors. If the mirror reflects admiration, they feel alive. If the mirror reflects rejection or indifference, they crumble inside. They may not show it on the outside because their entire strategy is to not appear weak. But inside, they feel like a ghost haunting their own life, constantly wondering, who am I really? This is why the narcissist can be so exhausting to deal with, because they are always performing. Every interaction is a stage. Every relationship is a role to be played. Every achievement is a prop. They don't just lie to others, they lie to themselves. And the longer they live this way, the more disjointed and unstable they become. They're trying to survive in a world where authenticity is needed, but they've trained themselves to fear that very authenticity. They cannot sit still with themselves. Silence becomes unbearable because it exposes the emptiness. They constantly need noise, praise, validation, or drama to keep their false self alive. They become dependent on the energy of others because they have no stable energy of their own. And yet, the more they rely on others, the more resentful they become, because deep inside, they hate the fact that they feel so powerless without external validation. That's the torment of a fragmented identity. It robs them of peace, of self-acceptance, and of wholeness. They are split between who they want people to believe they are and who they fear they truly are. The shame they carry from childhood, often due to unmet emotional needs, rejection, or trauma, becomes a poison that seeps into their sense of self. And instead of healing that shame, they try to outrun it by creating a fantasy version of themselves that never quite satisfies. No matter how much attention they gain, how many people they manipulate, or how many titles they collect, it's never enough. Because they're not feeding the real self, they're feeding a projection. And projections don't grow, they distort, they fracture, they eventually collapse. You, as someone who has encountered a narcissist, may have seen glimpses of this. You may have wondered why they seem lost, even when they're winning. Why they lash out when you simply ask them to be honest. Why they fear being vulnerable. It's because vulnerability threatens the illusion, and the illusion is the only thing holding their fragmented identity together. But let this understanding be your freedom. Their attacks are not evidence of your weakness. They are reflections of their own disintegration. Their lies are not meant to destroy you. They are desperate attempts to hold themselves together. And their manipulation is not power. It's a defense against their own inner chaos. When you realize that a narcissist is not operating from wholeness, you stop taking it personally. You stop engaging the performance. You stop feeding the false self. And in that moment, you begin to reclaim your peace, your power, and your purpose. They don't seek control because they are confident. They seek control because they are afraid. Deep within the heart of a narcissist is not a throne, but a prison built by fear. The desperate need to control people, conversations, relationships, and even perceptions isn't rooted in strength. It's rooted in a terror that the truth will be revealed. That truth, that they are not as powerful, not as secure, and not as in control as they pretend to be. Their entire identity is a carefully crafted performance, and performances can't afford to go unscripted. You see, a healthy person can let life flow. They can tolerate disagreement, allow room for others to be seen and celebrated. But the narcissist, when deeply suffering inside, cannot let that happen. Why? Because every moment that they are not controlling the narrative is a moment their inner vulnerability risks being exposed. Their fear is not just about being seen in a bad light, it's about being seen truly. Because if people saw the inner chaos, the unhealed wounds, the self-doubt, they fear they would lose all validation, admiration, and power. So they grasp for control like it's oxygen. This is why they micromanage relationships, why they gaslight, why they triangulate, why they twist your words. It's not because they're confident. It's because they're trying to keep the spotlight exactly where they need it to be, away from their inner brokenness. The moment someone gets too close to the truth, the narcissist reacts, not with humility, but with hostility. Exposure is the enemy of their illusion, and their illusion is the only thing keeping them from emotional collapse. Even their obsession with controlling their image online, in public, in family settings, is a sign of this inner suffering. They cannot rest unless they feel they are winning, admired, or appearing superior. And the deeper the internal pain, the tighter they grip the illusion. You'll notice that when they feel a loss of control, such as you standing up to them, or someone calling out their behavior, they don't just get upset. They unravel, they erupt. The false self begins to crack, and with it, their composure. This is not just anger. It's panic, a survival instinct. Because control is their security blanket. At the root of this behavior is often a traumatic past, perhaps rooted in emotional neglect, rejection, or shame that was never healed. Somewhere along the way, they decided that vulnerability was unsafe, that they must control their environment to avoid pain. And so they built a false identity, one that appears untouchable, self-assured, even arrogant. But no matter how high they build the walls, the fear remains inside. The more suffering they feel, the more controlling they become. Not out of malice, but out of desperation. When you understand this, you begin to see through the intimidation tactics. You stop personalizing their manipulation. You stop dancing for their approval. And instead, you stand in your truth. You detach not with bitterness, but with clarity. Because now you see the person trying to dominate you is drowning inside. That doesn't mean you tolerate abuse. That doesn't mean you rescue them. But it means you reclaim your power by refusing to be a pawn in someone else's fear-driven game. Control is not love. Control is not confidence. It is camouflage for emotional pain. The narcissist seeks to rule so they don't have to reveal. They command so they don't have to confront their own pain. But here's the truth they cannot escape. Real strength isn't in domination. It's in authenticity. Real power isn't in manipulation. It's in truth. And until they face their wounds, they will continue to try to control the world around them because they cannot control the war within. And for you, the one who has walked through the fire, endured the manipulation, survived the chaos, may this truth liberate you. Their control has never been about you. It has always been a mirror reflecting what's unresolved within them. So choose freedom, choose wisdom, choose to rise. Because when you break free from the narcissist's grip, you not only protect your peace, you reveal just how powerless that illusion really was. Let me know if you'd like this same deep dive for the chart or next. They sabotage relationships because they don't believe they deserve love. This is one of the most painful truths buried beneath the narcissist's destructive patterns. On the outside, they seem to operate with dominance and entitlement, acting as though love is something they are owed or can manipulate at will. But within the inner chambers of their heart, there is a haunting belief that they are fundamentally unworthy of being loved, at least not in any consistent or unconditional way. It is a silent conviction, one formed through deep emotional wounds, often from childhood neglect, abuse, or conditional affection. And rather than confront this brokenness, the narcissist becomes the saboteur of their own joy. They destroy the very thing they secretly crave. Because when someone begins to love them deeply, when someone sees past their charm, past their manipulation, and tries to reach the human within, the narcissist feels naked and terrified. Love becomes a threat, not a gift. Why? Because true love requires vulnerability, accountability, and emotional exposure. But these are the very things the narcissist has trained themselves to avoid at all costs. To be loved deeply means to be known, and to be known means someone might see their flaws, their insecurities, their shame. And so before the love can anchor, they burn the bridge. They create chaos. They push away. They accuse, gaslight, cheat, or withdraw anything to destroy the intimacy that is forming. This behavior isn't about pleasure, it's about protection. It is their subconscious way of saying, I will not let you hurt me the way others did. They preempt the rejection they assume is coming, because in their wounded mind, every relationship is temporary. Every gesture of love is a trap. Every act of kindness is a setup for abandonment. So they abandon first. They turn on the one who loves them. They become cold or cruel, not because they hate the person in front of them, but because they hate the reflection of themselves they see in the mirror of love. You see, real love exposes their internal emptiness. It challenges their inflated image. It pierces through the performance and touches the wound. And rather than allow that wound to be healed, they protect it with pride. They armor themselves in detachment. They become distant, erratic, even abusive, because in their mind, closeness is a danger zone. If you get too close, you might discover how unworthy they feel. If you see their scars, you might confirm what they fear the most, that they are unlovable, broken beyond repair. This is the tragic paradox of the narcissist. They long for deep connection, but they can't sustain it. They crave admiration, but reject true affection. They want to be chosen, but they keep choosing to destroy the ones who choose them. And in doing so, they relive the very rejection they are trying to avoid. It becomes a painful cycle. Get close, sabotage, feel abandoned, blame others, repeat. And the person on the other end, often empathic, loyal, and compassionate, feels confused and heartbroken. They ask themselves, what did I do wrong? Why did they change? Why does it feel like I'm being punished for loving them? But the truth is, it was never about the worthiness of your love. It was about their inability to receive it. Because someone who believes they are unlovable will always find a way to escape love's reach. This is why healing from narcissistic abuse requires a deep shift in perspective. You must stop internalizing their rejection. You must understand that you are not the cause of their sabotage. You were simply the mirror that reflected their inner emptiness. Your love was light, and light will always agitate darkness that hasn't been healed. It's not your job to fix them. It's your calling to protect your peace, to walk away when love is turned into a battlefield, and to learn the difference between someone needing healing and someone choosing harm. The narcissist's sabotage is a symptom of a deeper soul wound, one that only God can heal if they ever surrender to that process. Until then, every new relationship will become another stage for the same tragedy. And those who dare to love them will be cast as villains, enemies, or threats. Not because of what they've done, but because of what the narcissist cannot believe about themselves. That they are worthy of love without destruction, without control, without fear. So let your heart be free from confusion. You are not too much. You are not too loving. You are just too real for someone still hiding from themselves. And their sabotage is not your burden to carry. It's the evidence of a battle they haven't begun to fight. They mimic empathy, but internally feel numb or empty. This is one of the most misunderstood and deceptive aspects of a narcissist's suffering. On the surface, they may smile at the right times, say the right things, or even offer words that appear comforting. They can study human emotion like a script, learning how to act concerned, how to shed a tear, how to feign compassion. But these gestures are not born from an inner well of genuine connection. They are survival tactics, strategic performances designed to maintain the illusion that they are normal, even caring. Inside, however, there is often a vast emptiness, a hollow echo where emotional depth should reside. You see, narcissists are not born with that emptiness. It is crafted over time, often in early childhood, when the authentic self was rejected, neglected, or shamed. The child learned that love was conditional, based on performance, appearance, or obedience. So, instead of cultivating an internal world of honest feeling, they constructed a false self, a persona designed to get approval, attention, and control. As they grew older, that mask hardened. And the more it was reinforced by external success or manipulation, the more disconnected they became from real empathy. The soul, now starving for authenticity, becomes a stage where only performances are allowed. This emptiness is not peaceful. It is tormenting. Imagine walking through life never truly connecting with anyone, even while surrounded by people. Imagine feeling compelled to maintain a public image, all while your inner world feels like a wasteland. Imagine knowing what pain is, but having no ability to share in someone else's. That is the hidden grief of a narcissist. They may not cry over it. They may never speak of it. But their actions will betray the inner reality. They overcompensate with grand gestures, dramatic displays, and over-the-top concern. Not because they care deeply, but because they want to appear like they do. Because appearance is survival. And survival is their only language. The numbing becomes a pattern. When they hurt someone, there is no true remorse. There is only calculation. Did this damage my image? Did this weaken my control? If the answer is yes, they may apologize. Not because they feel guilt, but because they fear the consequences. This disconnection from empathy is why they can move from person to person, relationship to relationship, leaving behind chaos with little reflection. Their numbness protects them from the shame they don't want to feel. But it also isolates them from the joy they deeply crave. They can't feel your pain, but they can't feel your love either. This is why healing from narcissistic abuse is so critical, because many victims assume the narcissist simply doesn't care. And that belief cuts deep. But once you understand that their inability to care is not about you, but about their own inner disorder, you stop internalizing their emotional absence. You stop asking, why wasn't I enough? And start realizing they never had the capacity to receive what I was giving. That truth sets you free. In private moments, when the mask slips, some narcissists experience an overwhelming dread. They might not call it emptiness. They might call it boredom, restlessness, or even rage. But it is the soul crying out from the prison of self. Without deep intervention, without humility, and without surrender to something greater than themselves, that numbness continues to rule their lives. And the more they try to fill the void with admiration, status, or attention, the more the soul feels bankrupt. It's like pouring water into a bucket full of holes. Nothing ever stays, nothing ever satisfies. And this is why many narcissists spiral as they age. Because the charm that once covered the emptiness begins to fade. The attention that once sustained them begins to dwindle. And the empathy they once mimicked becomes harder to maintain. Their inner world, which was already cold, becomes frozen. and the people around them who once gave warmth begin to leave. They are left with their own reflection, and for many, that's the one thing they've spent a lifetime avoiding. This kind of suffering is deep, but it's also hidden. It hides behind laughter. It hides behind success. It hides behind dominance. And it hides behind fake empathy. You, as someone who has crossed paths with such a person, must learn to separate illusion from truth. Their performances don't reflect your value. Their lack of feeling doesn't reflect your worth. Their numbness isn't your responsibility. What they feel or fail to feel is not for you to fix. It is for you to understand so that you can walk away, not with anger, but with clarity. Not with bitterness, but with healing. Because the greatest victory is not just escaping the narcissist's trap. It's recognizing that their numbness cannot steal your ability to feel, to love, and to grow. That, beloved, is the true liberation. That is the divine restoration of your emotional power. That is how you rise above. They rage not from power, but from powerlessness. This is perhaps one of the most misunderstood truths about narcissistic behavior. To the untrained eye, their explosive anger, their sharp tongue, their calculated vengeance, it all looks like strength. It looks like dominance. But in reality, this rage is not an expression of control. It is the outcry of someone who feels utterly out of control. It is not the roar of a lion in command. It is the scream of a wounded soul whose inner world is falling apart. A narcissist does not explode because they are strong. They explode because they are terrified that they are weak, exposed, and unseen. Rage is their last-ditch attempt to regain a sense of relevance in a moment when they feel it slipping away. A narcissist's anger is not random. It is strategic, but also desperate. When they lose admiration, when they are challenged, when their carefully curated image is threatened, they lash out because the mask is cracking. They feel naked. They feel rejected. And to them, rejection is annihilation. It's not just someone saying no. It's someone saying, you're not special. And that strikes them at the core of their false self. So they rage. But make no mistake, their fury is not power. It is panic. It is the panic of someone whose entire identity depends on external validation. And now that validation is slipping through their fingers. They scream to silence the truth. They insult to feel taller. They belittle to feel big. But deep down, they are drowning in insecurity. Imagine a person stuck in a burning building, but instead of calling for help, they yell at the people outside for not respecting them. That's the narcissist. The fire is inside them, shame, fear, inadequacy. And rather than face it, they project it onto others. Rage becomes their shield, their sword, their illusion of dominance. But inside, they are losing grip. That's why their anger often comes when you least expect it. A simple disagreement, a boundary, a moment where you simply choose yourself over them, it sets off a storm. Why? Because it reminds them that they are not in control. It reminds them that someone else has power. It reminds them that they cannot manipulate you anymore. And for someone who built their identity around control, that's unbearable. So they rage not because you've done something wrong, but because you've taken your power back. And that powerlessness terrifies them. This kind of rage is often followed by cycles of guilt and shame, though you may never see it. Because narcissists are often masters of self-deception. They'll rewrite the story in their head, make you the villain, justify their outbursts. But late at night, when the audience is gone and the mirror is honest, they know. They know something is wrong. They may not be ready to admit it. They may never speak it. But inside, they are in torment. Their inability to handle criticism, their obsession with image, their desperate need to be right, it all reveals a soul that has never known true peace. The tragedy is that many narcissists were once wounded children, children who were never enough or always too much, children who had to perform to be loved or stay silent to survive. Somewhere along the line, they decided that love was a competition, that safety meant superiority, that worth had to be won. And now as adults, they rage because the world does not play by those broken rules. The love they want cannot be forced. The respect they crave cannot be demanded. The healing they need cannot be faked. And that frustrates them deeply. So if you've ever been on the receiving end of a narcissist's rage, understand this, it wasn't about you. It was about the mirror you held up. You reflected a truth they couldn't face. You became a symbol of their lack of control. Your strength became their reminder of weakness. And so they attacked, but their attack was not strength. It was a symptom of internal collapse. Understanding this gives you clarity. It gives you peace. It helps you stop internalizing their chaos. Because once you see the rage for what it is, a cry of powerlessness, you no longer fear it. You no longer let it define you. You rise above it. You walk away from it. And most importantly, you recognize that real power doesn't have to shout. Real strength doesn't seek to destroy. Real healing doesn't rage, it rests. That's where you're headed. Toward rest, toward peace, toward strength that doesn't need to prove anything. And in that place, the narcissist's rage no longer rules. It fades, it burns out, because you are no longer feeding the fire. You are no longer standing in the flames. You are free. Their greatest fear is irrelevance and being forgotten. This truth lives beneath the surface of every exaggerated gesture, every over-the-top performance, and every manipulative tactic. The narcissist does not merely crave admiration, they need it to breathe. They feed on attention because it validates their fragile sense of self-worth. Deep within them is a gaping void, a space created long ago by rejection, trauma, or unmet emotional needs. And into that void they pour the illusion of superiority, the delusion of grandeur, and the desperate pursuit of significance. When they are no longer the center of attention, something terrifying happens inside them. The silence is deafening. The stillness feels like death, because when the crowd stops clapping, they're left alone with themselves, and they cannot bear that solitude. In the absence of admiration, they begin to question their worth. And since their self-worth is not rooted in truth or self-awareness, they spiral. That's why they react so violently when ignored, so harshly when forgotten, or so erratically when someone else outshines them. It's not about the other person, it's about their inner terror of being erased. They live in constant comparison, not for inspiration, but for competition. If someone else is praised, they feel it as a personal attack. If another is chosen, they feel rejected. Why? Because deep inside, their value is measured only through the eyes of others. This is why narcissists often surround themselves with weaker, more dependent individuals. People they can control, people who won't threaten their spotlight. The moment someone independent, secure, and wise enters their life, the narcissist feels endangered. Not because that person is harmful, but because that person reminds them of everything they pretend to be. They fear becoming invisible. This is the source of their exaggerations, their lies, their endless need to impress. They cannot let the world forget about them. Even in failure, they want to be remembered. If not as the hero, then as the villain. If not loved, then feared. Because in their mind, even bad attention is better than no attention at all. This is why some narcissists will start chaos before they allow peace to silence them. They'd rather be the reason for destruction than be ignored completely. The idea of being replaced is unbearable to them. That's why they will return to past victims, not because of love, but because of the fear that someone else has filled their place. When they see you move on, heal, and thrive without them, it shakes the very foundation of their identity. They may not admit it, but seeing you stand in your power without needing them is one of the most painful realizations for a narcissist. It confirms their worst fear, that they were not essential, that they were not the source of your light, that their absence did not diminish your shine. Their fear of being forgotten drives many of their toxic behaviors. They will smear your name so that even in your absence, people are still talking about them. They will cause drama so their presence lingers even after they're gone. They may post, boast, flaunt new relationships, or pretend to be unfazed, all in hopes that you or others are still watching, still wondering, still thinking about them. Because for them, irrelevance is a slow death. If no one remembers them, then who are they? Without an audience, their identity crumbles. But here's the truth, they can't outrun irrelevance forever. Eventually, the people who once feared them grow bold. The ones they manipulated learn the truth. And the ones who suffered begin to heal. Time unmasked the narcissist. And when people stop reacting, stop responding, and stop revolving around them, the narcissist is forced to face their greatest enemy, themselves. And in that lonely mirror, they find not a God, but a fractured soul. This is why your silence is powerful. Your healing is powerful. Your ability to walk away and no longer feed their ego, it's not just self-preservation, it's spiritual warfare. You don't have to fight them with words. Your peace is the loudest response. Your growth is the clearest revenge. And your purpose is the spotlight they can never dim. Let them fear irrelevance. Let them panic when your light no longer points in their direction. Because while they desperately seek significance, you have found yours in truth, in wholeness, and in divine alignment. You don't need to be remembered by people who once tried to break you. You only need to remember who you are.